active hope, cultivating inspired responses to planetary crisis. And as I was reflecting on that title, I was thinking, oh, planetary crisis, is that a bit strong? You know, there's some places you go and people might say, well, planetary crisis, I'm not really quite sure what you mean by that. And so I just want to start by just getting your assessment here, your assessment. I want to do what I call a problemometer. A problemometer is like, if this is a kind of dial, and over here is 0, and over here is 10. How bad do you think things are? That there is a pretty strong consensus, and that's why we're here. Although I'd say that's part of why we're here. That's part of why we're here. There's another part of why we're here, and I want to do, if that was the problemometer, I want to do a responsometer. So the responsometer is how well developed do you think our collective response is? How well developed would you say our collective response is? So over here is 0, and over here is a mass mobilization inspired, creative, empowered response. That's over there. So, okay, responsometer. And look around you and notice the difference. And that's what I want to talk to. That's what I want to talk to, is the difference between the problem and the response. And I've done this gauging with lots of groups in different places, and everywhere I see the same thing, that there is a huge gap between the size of the problem and the size of the response. And that's a lot of why we're here. Because there is a real task in activating our response. It's a piece of work, and that's the piece of work that I really want to focus on. And I want to focus on by just looking at, well, three different ways perhaps that we could inspire a response. And I find it helpful, very helpful idea is to think of 3 bits of change. And I'm going to move around a bit here. So 3 bits of change, perhaps if there's 3 chairs here. And over here is the first bit of change. And the first bit of change is about awareness. And there's a kind of assumption in this bit of change that if only people knew how bad things were, then we'd have a mass movement and people would be out on the streets and, you know, we'd be really getting it together. So this is the first bit of change. And it is really essential to raise awareness of the problem. But you only have to look at a packet of cigarettes with the big letters, smoking kills, to know that awareness of the problem is often by itself not enough to inspire change. So, okay, this is the first bit of change, awareness of the problem. And then the third bit of change here is action. Action to do something about it. So with giving up smoking, it might be, you know, aware of the problem, but then there's also 10 ways to give up smoking, 10 different things you can do. And you see that also with climate change. You know, there's really important things that we should all be doing. The 10 things, if we do this, and we do this, and we do this, and we do this, then that will go a long way to really bringing the kind of responses, the results that we need. And also, we can have lists of things to do, but they get ignored. And so this bit of change, really important as it is by itself is not enough. So what I'd like to introduce you to is Paul, who happens to be sitting in the middle chair, and it's what I call the MBOC. The MBOC. And the MBOC, that's MBOC, stands for the middle bit of change. And the middle bit of change is, sorry to stand in front of you there, but Paul really sits here well, kind of, because it's your work, Paul. You know, it's the middle bit of change, and mine too, and it's what brings us here today, because we're interested in this. We know that there's some really important steps between awareness and action, and that we need to give our attention to that. And in that space, we can look at things like desire. We can look at things like belief that it's possible. We can look at things like motivation and inspiration. And I have a lot of enthusiasm for this MBOC because, as Paul said, I lived in Bristol for over 20 years. And most of that time I worked with the Bristol Specialist Alcohol Service. And there's a similar thing goes on there with addiction. Often there's a similar mismatch between the size of the problem and the size of response. That I remember running a group session on dealing with crisis, and there was somebody there, he had yellow skin from advanced alcoholic liver disease, that his liver was kind of all blocked up, and so his bilirubin was building up in the blood, had really severe jaundice. And we had this session on crisis, and he said, well, I can't really see that I've got much crisis in my life, really. You know, and someone else in a similar situation saying, well, you know, people go on about my drinking, I think it's all rather overblown. So there is another area where often when I start seeing people, they may be in the space where their response was really over here. It's like, okay, everyone else keeps going on at me, but actually from my side, I don't think things are too bad. But also one of the real advantages of working in that field in the same team for, it was about 17 years, is that there were some clients I saw them, you know, one time, and then I saw them a few years later, and then I saw them a few years later, and I saw them at different times over that. And I saw that for some clients, I mean, every year I'd have people I'd known well and worked with die, but I would also have people I'd known well and worked with send me postcards saying things like sand, sun, and sobriety. That we know that it's possible to recover from addiction. And if you speak to people in recovery from addiction, they may describe a process, a journey that they went through that began in the place of thinking the problem was overblown, thinking that other people were on their back, but actually they were quite happy as they were. And then that there's a journey of activation. And it's one of I see one of my great teachers, one of the group that I've really been taught by, are the people who I've seen have their survival instinct switch on. You know, we'd often think that survival instinct actually outplays all other things, but it doesn't. You can deaden your survival instinct. And that, I remember Joanna Macy once writing, of all the problems in the world, from climate chaos to nuclear warfare, none is so great as the deadening of our response. But also, it's possible to undeaden our response. And that's really what I want to look at. I want to look at how that happens. And in particular, I'm thinking of one person I worked with one time, and she said, when I was drinking, I would do anything. I would do anything to get a drink. I'd get up at 6 in the morning, I'd walk 3 miles if I knew that that was what I needed to do to get a drink. And in recovery, I need to find the same degree of determination. I need to find the same degree of creativity. That sense of, this is the most important thing. This is my prime directive, working and living recovery. So what I'd like to do is kind of just see if there'll be some lessons that I'll be drawing from the addictions field, and some from my close working with Joanna Macy, Paul mentioned, who's somebody who's really given her life to really looking at what activates our response. How do we switch on the desire and capacity, strengthen the desire and capacity to make a difference? And I want to name this as a piece of work, because this is a piece of work that brings us here together. And when I heard that client talk about, you know, in recovery, I'll do anything. I'll do anything to support my recovery. It's the most important thing. What I really noticed there was that it was a state that she was in. It was a state of an activated response. And when I think about what's needed in relation to climate change, I feel like we need to cultivate, find, nourish, train ourselves in finding a similar state. And I call this state Niai Taflo. And I think of Niai Taflo as like an advanced state of like spiritual connectedness, where, remember Jay talking about the glint of wild love of the wild, like that, when you really see that light in the eye, when we can reach this state of niai-ta-flow. And what I mean by niai-ta-flow is it's the state of being nourished, energized, empowered, and inspired to act for life on earth. And I see that this is a project, I call it Project Niai-ta-flow. Project Niai-ta-flow is the work of cultivating this state of being nourished, energized, empowered, and inspired to act for life on earth. And what I like about this state is actually it feels really good. So it's actually something that meets personal needs as well as planetary needs. Because I think that there's a real problem with association about activism. Activism is often not seen as like a really fun thing to do. And that in order to make change, draw people to it, we need to make it attractive. So what I'd like to do is, I'm going to be talking about this state of niai-ta-flow and a training, and what I'd like to do is I'd like to enroll you in this too. Are you up for that? A bit of niai-ta-flow training? Okay, I'm seeing lots of nodding heads. So, and what I mean by training, I think of it as a strengthening journey. There's a strengthening journey that we start here and we move to over here, and in that journey, something is changed, deepened, strengthened inside us. And that I'd say that one of the starting places of that journey is really what we're here for today. It's something about a radically different view of hope. And that's what I'd like to start with, and then I'd like to look at how do you cultivate this radically different view of hope. And I want to start just by looking at the word hope, because the word hope has two main different meanings. So one meaning of hope is hopefulness. And when you say, well, am I hopeful? What you often mean by that is, what's your assessment of the likelihood of success? And that's a kind of like, it's a mathematical computation that goes on inside your brain, What, am I hopeful? I don't know, I have to think about that and do a bit of calculus. But, there's a kind of a process, and there can also be a block there. That when people don't feel hopeful about something, they may think, well, is it worth the investment of energy? I'm not very hopeful that that's going to yield much, so I don't really think it's worth the effort. And that becomes a block, and I've seen that block happen in addictions recovery. I remember one client saying to me, I've given up giving up. I've given up giving up because every time I do give up for a while, it will last so long and then it will all crash down again. And that's a painful process of building up, knocking down, building up, knocking down. And we can go through that in our efforts around climate change too, that there's kind of glimmers of hopefulness and then it all comes crashing down. It's a painful process. People find, one way of avoiding that pain is just to not invest the time in the first place. So if hope is seen in terms of hopefulness, calculation of possibility, that can become a block. But also what I saw happen was that there were people moved out of that giving up, where there was a time where people just didn't believe it was possible, and I call it the stage of disbelief. The stage of disbelief is like a frame in a movie film where when they're in that frame, they don't believe it's possible. But I've seen people move out of that, and understanding how people move out of that is really important task for us. It's a really important inquiry, because if we can look at how that happens, and one of the ways it happens is something to do with hope, is where people move from the feeling of hope as hopefulness and only engaging, investing in something if you feel hopeful that it will succeed, to a different meaning of hope, which is hope in terms of desire. If I ask you, are you hopeful that we will do what's necessary for climate change, I don't know what you're going to answer to that, but I'm going to, I suspect that you may not feel hopeful. But if I ask, what do you hope for, then your answer may come really quickly and it may be really clear. And in my writing work, one of the things I've done is interview people about how they find their capacity to make a difference in the world. And remember interviewing somebody who said, well, I just feel like it's a waste of time really, that we are on a downward spiral, that basically the world is dying, and there's not much we can do about it. And this was a woman called Jane in complete despair. And her view is actually very widely held. The Mental Health Foundation did a big survey in 2007, asked over 2,000 people what their feelings were about world problems. And the commonest response was powerlessness. 56% of people, more than half of people, the commonest response was powerlessness. So it's like being in that stage of disbelief, the stage of disbelief where you think there's no chance that I'm going to be able to bring about the kind of change that I'd like to see happen. So in these two different meanings of the word hope, moving from am I hopeful to what do I hope for, I want to introduce the idea of active hope. And I really learnt about active hope from my clients here in Bristol, when they had reached a point where things were so bad, that talked about as hitting bottom, that something deep and powerful was switched on inside them. It was like a really deep and powerful shift where they said, well, I don't care what the chances are, I'm just going to do what is necessary. And that deep shift where it's like saying, well, what do I deeply hope for? I'm so sick and tired of this, I want something else. What I hope for is recovery. And what I'm going to do is be active in making that more likely to happen. So the 3 steps of active hope is you start from where you are, facing what you face, feeling what you feel. But then you ask yourself, okay, from this place, what do I hope for? And when you identify what you hope for, what you actually do is, so it's like you identify a timeline. A timeline that could happen from this point. So me here now, and there's what I hope for is over there, and then joining the two is a timeline. And it's only one of many possible timelines. There's loads of other things that can happen. I also have fears of what might happen. There's my worst fears, but there's also my best hopes. And the active hope is about being active in following that timeline. It's about being active in putting the full weight of your life and your choices behind what you hope will happen. Now, there's a really important distinction here between making something happen and making something more likely to happen. Because if you ask people, can you make an empowered response to climate change happen? People might say, well, I'd love to, but I'm not sure if I can. But if you ask, can you make it more likely to happen? That's a doable thing. That's a doable thing. And one of the ways we make an empowered, global, widespread, inspired mobilisation on climate change more likely is to make it happen in ourselves. I love the saying, move from they should to I will. When we move from they should to I will, we really look at what our part is, what we can do. And that this is where I come back to the project of Niai Taflo, is looking at what can we do to support ourselves becoming nourished, energised, empowered and inspired. Because if we can do that bit, if we are more nourished, energised, empowered and inspired to act for life on Earth, we make it more likely that other people will become that way too. Because one of the most powerful influences on human behaviour is what we see other people do. If we see other people with what Jay described as that glint in their eye, the glint in the eye of really being in love with life, acting for life, really putting themselves behind the timeline of heading towards the future we hope for. And we see that in other people and we know that we're not alone. It becomes something that is contagious. Now, my own state of Niai Taflonus, it oscillates. Sometimes I'm more nourished, sometimes I'm more energised, sometimes I'm more empowered, and sometimes I'm more inspired to act for life on Earth. And also, like probably all of you here too, I have my dips. I have my peaks and I have my dips. But what I'm really interested in is active processes that nudge me upwards. And that's really what I've learned from my work with Joanna Macy particularly, and also what I've learned from my work in the addictions field, is looking at practices that nudge upwards our determination, that nudge upwards our desire and our capacity, and that's the really important one, our capacity to make a difference in the world. So what Joanna describes, and we describe together in the book we wrote together, Active Hope, How to Face the Mess We're In Without Going Crazy, we described a 4-part strengthening journey. And some of you have done this before, like this spiral of what you call the work that reconnects. The work that reconnects is about how we plug back into life, like how we plug back into that energy source so that we can feel life moving through us. And what I'd like to do is take you on a journey around that spiral. There was that kind of nods when I asked you up for training earlier. You still up for it? Yep. Okay, we're going to do it. Okay, so we want to honour 2 things. We want to honour our desire to train to be more Ni'ai Flow. You up for that? But we also, part of that, the first one is being nourished, and we also become nourished in the tea break. So we want to hold both those things. And so in order to go with that, I'm going to ask you to call in, to evoke the spirit of brevity. Okay? And in order to do that, there's a chant where we call in brevity, and it goes like this. It goes, brevity is sweet, brevity is powerful, yeah! Together. Brevity is sweet, brevity is powerful, yeah! Cool, okay, I think we're with the brevity thing. So we're going to do a journey around 4 steps in a spiral. And for each of those, I'm going to invite you to make a statement, but also to be heard by someone else. So you're going to look around you, perhaps reach out and say, can I recruit you to hear me? Because there's something here, in addictions recovery, one of the most powerful treatments when they've done research on what works is an approach called motivational interviewing. And with motivational interviewing, it's not, you don't motivate people by giving them inspiring speeches, like I'm doing. You motivate people by becoming an inspiring listener. Because the most inspiring person you can hear is yourself when you say what inspires you. So this is the idea, we're going to be doing a bit of practice in motivational interviewing, listening to each other, making statements of our motivation. And if we're facing something really tough and hard, like what we are facing, you know, these are, I saw your hands going that way with the problem also, like we are in serious, deep trouble. And in order to face the stuff that's hard, it really helps if we can start from a strong beginning. And so we need to nourish ourselves right at the start of our journey. And one of the places to nourish ourselves is through giving attention to gratitude. So what I'm going to do with these proclamations, these statements, is I'm going to give you a beginning of a sentence, and I'm going to invite you to turn around, recruit somebody, and then take it in turns to hear each other say something. I'm going to give you the beginning of the sentence, and you see whatever feels natural to you to follow it. And we're going to have a statement for each of these 4 steps that we're going, and we're beginning with gratitude. And the statement goes along like this. Gratitude is a social emotion. It points our attention outwards. And so the statement that I'm going to ask you to say is, for supporting me to live, I give thanks to. For supporting me to live, I give thanks to. So just maybe now, just spend a moment reflecting on what supports you to live. You know, the air that you breathe in, imagine what that would feel like on Mars or Venus if you were to take a big breath in. Pardon me, it would be shocking. It would be shocking if you were on Mars or Venus. They're mostly carbon dioxide. On this planet it's different because of what supports us to live, which is plant life. Life with chlorophyll. So that's an example. For supporting me to live, I give thanks to all the green plants and plankton that produce the oxygen in the atmosphere. But there might be the bees, it might be your partner, it might be people who you're aware of supports you. So I'm just going to invite you now, and I'm actually going to invite you to stand up because we've been sitting a long time. There's a saying, sitting is the new smoking. Reach out and recruit somebody to be a listening partner and say, for supporting me to live, I give thanks to. So gratitude is nourishing. Does anyone feel nourished? When you give attention to what you really love and appreciate and what supports you, it also kind of brings up an awareness of how much of that may be threatened. And that's the times we're living. The vital support systems that support us to live are under threat. It's like we're hacking them to pieces. Plankton particularly are going through a really hard time at the moment. So I'm thinking of addictions recovery and what makes a real difference there. One of the things is hitting bottom. There is a stage where people, when they hit rock bottom, they experience the full alarm of where their life is heading in a way that shocks a kind of awakeness and activation of their survival instinct. We're going to be doing that now, and a statement that goes, when I consider the condition of our world, what aches or breaks my heart is. When I consider the condition of our world, what aches or breaks my heart is. And we're just having a brief proclamation, recruiting a listener who you will also give your ears. So with these first two steps of the spiral, beginning with gratitude, and then what we're doing with the second is honouring our pain for the world. And honouring is like really respecting as a valued messenger. Pain serves a role. There's a medical condition called Charcot joint where people lose the ability to feel pain in their joints. And so they don't know when their joints are being overstretched in a way that might damage them. And that's part of the trouble, is we switch off to pain. We don't know when our world is being overstretched in a way that harms and damages it. But also, what we're doing with these first parts is gratitude, really acknowledging what we love and receive from, honouring our pain. That's part of taking in what's happening. We now need to mobilise our response. And the third stage is about seeing with new eyes. Seeing with new eyes where you look at the same thing in a different way, in a way that helps you uncover and tap into new resources. So here's a shift. One view is, I have a purpose. But another view is, a purpose has you. And purposes are bigger than you, and they recruit people to act through. So I'm going to ask you just to play around with the sentence, a purpose acting through me is. And with that, when we talk about a purpose has you, what it has is we can give to a purpose our willing participation. We can give to a purpose our support. And when we do, that purpose has us and it acts through us. So if you can, this is the third stage, looking around, recruiting someone to hear you and be heard by you. A purpose acting through me is. So I wonder what that purpose will look like over the next 7 days. What visible expression may happen through you. And there's something here about, I think we can be kind of pregnant with purpose, where we carry it around inside us. It's like an intention. I really want to do something about that. And it's like a seed germinating inside us. And then also there's times where it sprouts above the surface. And it sprouts above the surface in terms of our actions, the steps that we take. And so the final stage of this spiral is called going forth. And it's looking at, okay, if you nourish this state of niyata flow, becoming nourished with gratitude, energized by your concerns, by your pain for the world, empowered by that seeing with new eyes, a shift in perspective, then what really helps inspiration is when you see yourself take steps. And that also becomes contagious because other people see you take steps too. So the fourth stage, the going forth, is designed to support action. I'm going to ask you for the final proclamation, is just to turn to someone and say, thinking of the purpose that you just named, and thinking about how that might act through you in the next 7 days, maybe just reflect just for a moment, okay, in the next 7 days, I will. In the next 7 days, I will. Just think about how that purpose might express itself through you. And if you're not sure, you might say, well, I will spend at least half an hour reflecting on what I'll do to take it forward. You can have a step before a step. You can have a preparation stage of change. So I'm going to invite you to now turn to someone and say, in the next 7 days, I will. So there is a training process, there is a state that we can reach, and we probably all might remember times when we've really felt it strong, the state where we are nourished, empowered, energized, inspired to act for life on earth. And that there is a task, there is a project to cultivate that, to cultivate it in ourselves and to cultivate it in others. And that is part of the work of the Climate Change Climate Psychology and Alliance. And that's why I'm really pleased that all of us have come here today, because we share this task in different ways, may have different approaches to it. Thank you very much.